ArcCorp, or as my wife likes to call it, Zorp Zorp, is a big ol' city planet. Think Coruscant, but without the annoying Jedi Council that don't tell you the cool stories. ArcCorp was the second city added to Star Citizen, right after Hurston, the year after Hurston, I believe. In fact, let's pull up the roadmap real quick and see if I can find, I think it was 3.8, I think is when they dropped in ArcCorp. No, 3.8 was Microtech. Oh boy, I got a little ahead of myself. 3.5? Yeah, 3.5. Yeah, so they were moving pretty quick with Stanton, you know? They say they're gonna build Nixon the same way they built Stanton, but like, Stanton, we got Hurston in 3.35, I believe. Yeah. And then we got ArcCorp in April, two patches later. And then we got Microtech at the end of that year. I guess they could do this with Nix, we'll see. And then Crusader came like later, because they had to get the clouds and stuff working. Yeah, Crusader is down here. There we go, 314. So ArcCorp, in the grand scheme of things, actually came fairly early on in the process. And Microtech and Crusader, you can just tell from running around them, are already pretty, like, updated. They seem like they are using a style that's a little more up-to-date, not just that high-tech architectural style, but the construction of them feels better than Lorville and ArcCorp. Lorville, being the oldest one, needed an update. But they're really only, like, these two planets only came a few months separate from each other, right? So let's look at what they look like when they first got dropped in. Here's Hurston. Rather, right. Here's Lorville. I'll show you like the actual city itself. So you can see how different it is now.
And again, Lorville's built using the same tech. It's a different kind of building set for a lot of it, but it's using the same sort of distribution tech that we do to sort of build out a city at a realistic scale for the ships that we have in the games. You know, which is kind of important for our game because we want to have everything feel real, visceral, tactile.
And I want to be super clear here too, because this is probably going to get lost in Star Citizen's history quite a bit. But this was essentially like a relaunching of the game. In 2015, I think it was, maybe 2014, one of the Crytek engineers told Chris, now most people don't know not to do this anymore, but he took the opportunity to tell Chris about something he was working on in his spare time. Think of it kind of like Sylvan was working on the VR stuff because he loved that. One of the Crytek engineers was working on Planet Tech, building cities, and was like, hey, check this out, dude. This whole freaking city thing, yeah, I can make that procedurally. And so they went to back away and they were like, okay, we can make a whole different game with this. Should we do it? Or should we just like keep trying to do what we are and say, screw the coolest game ever? And they put that poll out to the backers. I'm not even going to try and find it right now, but the backers were like, yeah, no, go do it. Make cities, make planets, go all in. And CIG was like, okay, let's do this. That's when the scope creep really hit. That's when everything exploded. Everything changed. Funding changed. Like, I mean, you can even look at the funding. Back when they were in that period of time, like they were making about as much money per year as they make in a quarter now. No, I'm sorry, a month. So it was 2017 when they released this and kind of were like, okay, planets are going to get big. And then in 2018, 2019, we got those updates and it works. But then persistence hit in 2020 and everything changed. Point being, all of this was just a huge change point for the game. And it kind of pivoted around Hurston and ArcCorp as those first two being added and demonstrated. This was Hurston. Here is ArcCorp. And ArcCorp was a little bit different because we already had a landing zone for ArcCorp as a separate module that you could try out just to demo out what a city might look like in the old version of Star Citizen. So this was interesting because they were taking what we already knew. Look at that. NPCs just so freaking happy to stand on chairs. It's the same things back then. And this was the new version of that city.
So, very Blade Runner-esque. We got going.
This was the first time we ever saw the Terrapin. We didn't even know what it was at this point.
Which, again, isn't in 3.0, but is going to be just after 3.0. Although I think we should probably, Glenn, shouldn't really. let's start the small amount, right? The new Aurora, perhaps.
The new Aurora. Now we're getting the new Aurora. This is the old new Aurora.
Welcome to Robert Space Industries. Enjoy the ride. System check. Engines are on.
All right, let's take off. Let's go flying.
So this is an interesting thing too, because there was so much debate about whether or not they were really going to let people take off from like basically a residential area in the city and fly out. Turns out obviously not. For those who have been around for a while, you probably remember there was a whole era of development where they were trying
to... We're going to let you actually get this close to the populated areas when we let you guys do it.
Yeah. They tried to do this whole landing spline thing that would guide you into the city, which was awful. Eventually they took it out and they let us do what we do now. People still would love to be able to fly through city buildings like this. I think it is an unmatched opportunity to fly a spaceship through the city that for most people is just a backdrop. You know, most people will never do this. But how many times have you been in a video game where you can see the backdrop and you're like, can I please just float out there just to see what it looks like? And I think that's one of those things that's kind of like, it's not that useful for a game, but it definitely sets a game apart when you can do it. It's the kind of thing that people will make videos about and point out and stuff. And with the amount of different types of cities and landing zones in this game, guys, one day maybe we'll go over that on the stream. I'll show you. There's a lot of really cool cities. I'd love to fly through them.
Earth-sized planet, completely covered with man-made structures, and at a real scale. So you're seeing everything to the horizon, fully covered. You can basically fly all over ArcCorp.
We would fly, we would crash into everything and stuff, but wouldn't it still be, just arrest those people, throw them in prison. And here we get our first mention and teaser of what the next star system would be after Stanton. Sorry, I'm getting a little off track here. We're going to get back to ArcCorp. I mean, this is ArcCorp, right? Old ArcCorp.
And that little the red cluster you see up there is actually the pyro system. So when we leave Stanton, that will be one of our destinations.
And then this was the big scene that I think got everybody to be like, oh, this is sick. Like, imagine this was before, like, nobody had done this before. The idea of an entire planet in a game you could visit. Maybe, I want to say, No Man's Sky was doing this, but when they first released, it was like very obvious that there was a transition between the planet and all that stuff. This was just still a very novel thing. So this next shot of turning around and seeing this was pretty crazy for everybody in the audience. This is CitizenCon 2017.
Glenn's just showing off.
It doesn't look like this, right? They used a graphic to make it look like this in this demo, which is annoying. But it was still the idea that you were flying up and then seeing the lights of the city that you were flying around before was just crazy.
And again, this would be, like I said, one of the places where cargo would come in, it would be unloaded, and then there would be NPCs or a player could potentially take small amounts down. But to give you an idea of this is, the beauty of the sort of Star Citizen 64-bit precision is like we fully, it's all there. We're up here on a space station looking down on the planet.
I hope it does look like that someday, because like I don't know. I don't think ArcCorp looks that great from orbit right now. It looks cool, but like it's clearly out of date. And that's what we're talking about here. So this was the first time they showed ArcCorp, right? And obviously what they just showed there was not actually what we ended up getting. If you go to CitizenCon 2948, then I believe we get to see the actual... No, this is all... Yeah, never mind. They never do any... Oh, I don't have a meeting right now. Shut up. I guess they all do... They didn't do any ArcCorp CitizenCon except for that. So we didn't get to see actual ArcCorp, but you guys know what ArcCorp looks like. So if we consider that was ArcCorp, and really this is the last time they showed us it until it got dropped in the game, and then when it got dropped in the game, it hasn't been updated. Jump forward to here, and Lorville got its update in 2023. So like if they both came in the same year, and they were both dealing with the same problems of being added back in 2018, but Lorville got updated in 2023. ArcCorp's feeling pretty outdated at this point. Look at what happened to Lorville here. It was a pretty nice update. They have some comparison shots, I believe.
About the location.
More like Moreville.
The biggest change from the old Lorville to the new is the scale of those buildings, and they feel much more integrated, lifelike as a city. And that was one of the reasons at the beginning why we wanted to change Lorville, was to get like that proper scale throughout the city, and that feeling that basically it can make you feel like it's a real city. Making the buildings at the correct scale can enable us later to create interiors for those buildings. And so in that sense, Lorville will be ready for that.
So that's a big thing, building interiors actually, that I didn't talk about yet. We'll get to that.
Close to the city, like especially while flying, like the feeling is just so great. We've lowered the restricted zone as much as we can, and we can really get close to the buildings now. The size of those windows are like true to real life size of windows.
It's kind of like what we were hoping from that ArcCorp demo.
It feels like really good. Level design.
So this is the update to Lorville. And as mentioned in chat, yeah, Lorville is a single planet compared to ArcCorp being a whole planet, or a single city compared to a whole planet. But it's Area 18, you know? They could just do Area 18, or at least change the way that the factories and the buildings look. But I hear you. It's a different idea to upgrade them. Now, what he was mentioning there when it came to building interiors, let me give you a quick look at that, because that's an initiative they're still working on, and you can actually find their progress on this right now with the municipal works, is the first version of this sort of building interiors thing. So as far as this development goes and how far it gets us, or how close it gets us to ArcCorp getting building interiors and stuff, this is kind of the direction that they wanted to head in. And you should look at Levski's municipal works to understand if that's working out or not.
Cityscapes to be more of a backdrop to the landing zone. We have the social space generally in the middle, and then the cityscape goes around it. And they've been designed to give the best composition, to be interesting to fly around, but we've not really thought about designing these buildings from the inside out. So what we're looking at here is some potential concepts for what could be interesting landing spaces that drives the architecture of the building.
Now, some context here, which I think is also important. This video is coming out in February of 2023, whereas the video we were just looking at with the Lorville update came out in April of 2023. So they were like what he's talking about with building the buildings from interior out is something that they did with Lorville for that rework. So it is something they're moving forward with, but it's good to remember he's also the art director at the company. So you're going to hear him say things like they could do this, or it might be like this, or this is what it will look like. That's because they just told him make this and then we'll design the game to go inside of it. So he's not deciding the gameplay. A lot of people will be like, he keeps using these words. It's because he's not in charge of what they actually do with those locations.
With landing pads, it doesn't necessarily need to be on the top of the building. It could be, halfway down or lower. So imagine, you're in the lower parts of the city, and then we'd open up these additional play spaces. And as you can see here, it's not just the landing pad, it's the gameplay space that goes along with it too.
So we continue on, and they talk about things like residential areas.
So moving on to residential. So there's a huge amount of potential here. What we wanted to do with residential is two things. One, explore investigating the potential player housing. So with that, we want to be able to create a variety of interior layouts. And also we want to explore a variety of architectural styles. So when we're looking at potential housing layouts, we wanted something fairly modular in a way in which we could create a variety of combinations. So whether it's living spaces or habitation spaces or social spaces. And also here we want the players to eventually be able to populate the player-owned habitation. So you see here like a first indication of how, the sort of dressing styles that you'd be able to do. Outside of something that's fairly utilitarian, we also want to do something that could be fairly high-end. So here we're just exploring some ideas about what a space could feel like on a different architectural style.
It's a lot. There's a lot that they want to do with this game. And I don't think these, people will look at this and say that it's gone. I don't think that's the case. I just think all of this is locked behind getting to the point where it's an actual game. You don't need to do this sort of stuff. Player housing isn't that important until base building's done, the economy's good to go, there's more gameplay and stuff. I think this stuff's still coming, and it's good to keep in mind for how long a game like this might take even past 1.0, but it's all leading towards the municipal works, which is where this next section comes in.
Now, finally, we're going to talk about the underground. Now, this is, I think, one of the coolest spaces. So rather than just focusing on the positive axis of the building, we're going to look at the underground. Now, what this does, it means we can access a whole area of play space that doesn't need to be contained inside the building. So within the lobby, we want the player to start to traverse down into these spaces, and these could be underground transit networks. They could be abandoned underground transit networks. This then could drive potential racing opportunities. So when we was doing this, we thought, it'd be really cool. What would it look like if there's an underground street race going on there?
All right. So you hear that, right? And if you go back to CitizenCon 2024, he mentions that the municipal works they're working on for ArcCorp were the extension of this. Those municipal works have now moved to Levski as of 2025, but I think they're still the extension. All that being said and known, clearly ArcCorp has a lot of potential, but it hasn't quite been met. Now, if we look at this page, we've been over this a lot, so I won't stay on it for too long. They've got their architectural styles here that they're working on, ArcCorp and Hurston being utilitarian. We have the other ones that we've talked about plenty of times. Now, the actual profile for ArcCorp, if you think that this is just, me coming up with stuff, if you go back in the lore, you will see some things here. They mention that Stanton was first explored by the UEE in 2851. That's about 100 years ago as of now. They sold the actual planet itself in 2865 to ArcCorp. So ArcCorp bought the planet, right? And then they started industrializing it. It says, today this is massive terraformed super Earth is one of the most industrialized worlds in the UEE. Nestled around the planet's oceans and mountain ranges is a vast network of skyscrapers, factories, expansive warehouses, support service buildings, office spaces, and employee habitation centers. Within the lore, the whole globe is not covered in buildings. Now, that doesn't mean they have to do that, but it starts to feel more and more like, I don't know, maybe we could move a little more towards this. Another thing that I think is interesting from here is the idea of planet tech and the biomes that we're going to have, and the possibility of biomes, that aren't city focused. I think it's interesting how we can look at this page and look at terrain layers and all these biomes and stuff, all these things that they're introducing to make the planets look different in different areas based on snow and soil and vegetation and all that stuff. But they could do the same thing for planetary biomes, right? You could have residential biomes, under construction biomes, derelict cities, like broken down ghetto biomes. Like there can be urban focused biomes just as much as there are these kind of I guess foliage, I don't know, geological biomes. So I think there's a really good chance of that. And they've talked about this. They've talked about wanting to do stuff with ArcCorp in the past. Here is, I think, one mention of some stuff about it.
For a long time. Remember early ArcCorp concept art that had these circular buildings. So, many people were kind of lamenting the loss, so I'm glad to hear that they're coming back.
Yeah, that was precisely the kind of stuff we looked at. I was like, oh, remember those old donut buildings? How can we bring it back? So
yeah. I think it's a good breakup visually from all the. From all the
it's from a distance. It's really good to see some different shapes going on when you're flying around. Definitely.
So this one's probably gonna be a little theory crafty, but I'm gonna.
Okay, so that's just about the shapes of buildings, which is very important. That's 2019. There was another talk here that I pulled up though. This is 2022. They talked a little bit about ArcCorp as well. See if they say anything update related.
Yeah. Okay. And lastly, I'm going to ask this. I already know the answer, but we're going to ask this so that everybody else knows the answer. Do you guys work on ArcCorp?
It's always on our backlog to make sure it doesn't rot and like break horribly, but we are aware that it has declined a tiny bit in quality, and there's a backlog item on our backlog, an item on our backlog about going back to it and evaluating what its current state is and what we can do to improve it. It has always been the odd one out, like it's breaking all the rules of the Planet Tech, always has. So it's very difficult and tricky to work with, and it's very easy to break. Obviously, you would like to do it just as much as we can, but it's also not the most fun planet to work on.
Yeah, when we talk about the systemic solutions, I think ArcCorp is a different beast from every other planet and moon in Star Citizen. It uses different tech. It uses, it's a whole nother thing. So I think it's safe to say to everybody who was asking, and it was coming up a lot in the chat, that it is not forgotten and it will not be ignored. It's just that we're developed with the tech that's being developed by the Planet Tech team and stuff that's pushing the tech forward with Pyro and with Nyx and with other things beyond that. Our focus is just there on the more organic side, but there will be a day when the wheel of development spins back around and it comes back to ArcCorp, just like it does everything at some point, and it'll get its time in the sun.
Yeah, so. I mean, just by the nature of Planet Tech evolving, eventually it will have changed so much that it breaks ArcCorp, and then we'll have to go back. So latest by then we'll.
Until then, players can look forward to the newest planet, RockCorp, which will just be all rocks. It'll be impossible to drive on. RockCorp. Take that to Reddit.
I think that's about what we know. They might have said something else since then. I don't think so, but it really sounds like obviously it's on the backlog. I think it's going to need a pretty big update. I think that update's going to want to take. Actually, I think we got some ArcCorp talk here. Hold on, let me see what he says here. Turn that back off.
Has ArcCorp been improved in any way with V4?
And I think this is a little bit before that, actually. Yeah, this is 2019, so we went back in time a bit.
ArcCorp is a very special beast in its own right, I'd say. Even in V3, we had to do put a lot of extra effort in adjusting the tech just for ArcCorp, and we have done the same for V4 as well. That being said, since we had to redo all planets, we didn't go all out rebuilding ArcCorp with everything, utilizing everything that we.
So if you missed that, he's saying that back when they did Planet Tech V4, they also didn't do a full remake for ArcCorp like they did the other planets. That was back in about 2020.
V4 has to offer in terms of improvements. So we just tried to get as close or slightly better than V3 ArcCorp, which I think we hopefully did. But it's not. Yeah, I mean, benefits from some of the improvements, like the space to ground transition being more consistent, but it's not a very different planet, I'd say.
Yeah, I think everything that improved in terms of the consistency from orbit to ground also is the case for ArcCorp. But a lot of the improvements that happened for V4 are very much based on the organic side of how a planet would work. So temperature and all this stuff, and what happens with terrain, and what happens with assets, and how stuff sort of mixes together. And ArcCorp
even that would make a difference. Like if it snowed in ArcCorp and one biome and versus the other, that would be different. All the buildings covered in snow and stuff. People wearing different clothes. Like maybe the buildings are built a little bit differently. I think there are things they could do, but from everything they're saying here, it sounds like ArcCorp is kind of like the caterpillar of planets, and they just don't really like. It's so troublesome. It's not worth fixing until everything else has been done. So I don't even know when the next time we'll see an ArcCorp update is. We gotta get a chance to ask that on Star Citizen Live. I'd be surprised if that hasn't been asked on a recent Planet Tech Star Citizen Live. Anybody aware of that? Because like that's pretty crazy that we haven't gotten that update. If I can't find it,
it's a very unnatural place because it's basically completely covered, right? So yeah. It's not benefiting as much from it as the organic locations.
For now, we'll see if we ever get when we hopefully get around to.
Yes, well, eventually, we were talking about this a little bit before
Hello,
the show.
everybody. Welcome.
We've stated before in the past, eventually ArcCorp will need to be revisited to add things like its oceans and stuff like that. So I would imagine that whenever that time comes.
Well, okay, there we go. It just kind of confirmed in this video. It will get its oceans and stuff that were mentioned in the lore we saw.
There's will probably be a good chance to look at the other stuff.
But who knows when that's happening.
It can actually benefit from in the V4 tech properly with a proper rework of content.
So, just going back to what it was saying, it's got its oceans, it's got some mountains, and I do think that in general, a lot of people are having a difficult time believing the timeline as it is. This is a planet that was sold to the company in, I think, 2890 something? 2865 it was sold to ArcCorp. So in the lore, that's 90 years. Just to like really put that into perspective. The entire planet's been covered in buildings in 90 years. I think a lot of people have a little bit of trouble believing that. Now, they could probably, who actually cares? It's a fictional world. They can come up with whatever excuses they want. But I do think that like adding those oceans in, adding in some places where there's a little bit of wilderness that will make it more believable. It'll also make more sense because of the storm systems and weather patterns and stuff like that. And it'll just make the planet more interesting because you can't land anywhere. So is this crazy? Will this happen? Yes, I do believe so. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, and that's kind of a bummer. But I think ArcCorp's going to need to change at some point.